Victoria 3. It's a nightmare that never ends. With certain pieces of media you can just consume it once, like a season in a series or one film, and then that's it. If it's bad, you can just forget about it the next day or complain about it for a little while, but after everything that needs to be said about it has been said, you can move on with your life. With Victoria 3 that's impossible, at least for me. It doesn't end on launch, in fact launch is just the beginning. With Paradox Games, and there's no better representation of this than Vic 3, launch date is actually quite an early stage of development, what other games might call early access. Yes, it's a good thing that they're updating Victoria 3 and giving out all these free patches and trying to fix the game, but they seem to be doing that very badly, failing a lot, making a lot of mistakes, while asking us to nominate them for the Labour of Love Award on Steam. These mistakes haven't been pointed out very much among people that have a YouTube channel and an audience, but boy have they been pointed out by Vic 3's own player base on Reddit, Discord, the forums, and Steam reviews. Victoria 3 1.5 is a very mixed bag, literally. There are a lot of improvements in there, of course, don't forget that, but it was very messy and there were a lot of questionable decisions made. The free weekend and the open beta were good for the consumer, but very dubious from a business and finances perspective, which, at the end of the day, is what's going to decide if the game gets abandoned or not. The military changes aren't even remotely the reintroduction of micromanagement that a lot of you are hoping for, but they are a movement in that direction and an abandonment of many of the original principles of the Vic 3 war system, which leaves the game in a very strange middle ground position that pleases neither side of this debate. Anyway, welcome back to your favourite thing, which is Spudgun talking about Victoria 3. I'm going to cover patch 1.5, the monster patch, the anniversary patch, the biggest patch Victoria 3 has ever seen. It's been quite a bit of time since it actually came out. I've been focusing on Victoria 2 content, of course, and playing Lethal Company, which is an indie game made by one person that blows out anything made by AAA studios like Paradox with millions of dollars and huge teams. But the length of time since 1.5 actually came out has allowed the dust to settle and to give a really good overview of the whole thing in this video. So please smash that like button as if it was the advance front button, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you like the things I'm saying in this video, and you somehow haven't already watched my previous back catalogue of Vic 3 videos, feel free to check out that playlist including the very well-aged Victoria 3 War System video. 95% of what I do here is Victoria 2 videos, so you can check them out in various playlists such as the ongoing Bavaria series, but I like to take a little moment to check in on the supposed sequel every now and again, from an outside perspective. Also, if you want to support the channel, here's my Patreon. Now without further ado, let's talk about things overall. Why am I talking about Victoria 3 here? I don't play Victoria 3, I play Victoria 2. So when some Vic 3 fans say I'm just a salty Vic 2 player who didn't get the game I wanted, shitting on Victoria 3, well of course they're right. But I'm not just salty about it, I get a lot of joy and satisfaction seeing this vision of a Victoria 3 failing in so many ways and even on its own terms. Paradox makes it nearly impossible not to dunk on Victoria 3 when they leave so many open goals with their mind-boggling decisions. As many people have said, and as I've said before, if this was a different franchise not labelled Victoria, I wouldn't really care about it at this point. And even if you really like Victoria 3, which is completely fine, you can surely understand that. You can see how the two games, despite sharing the name, have almost nothing in common apart from the era they happen to be set in. Something that's really annoying is that the Vic 3 devs keep appealing to Victoria 2 in order to sell more Victoria 3. Whenever they do this increases my militancy, let me tell you. They keep acting as if there's some kind of continuity between the 2 and 3 in this franchise. There isn't. War, two weirdos celebrating women's suffrage being passed or something. There's a video here from Andy's Take, or his subsidiary channel Andy's Paradox, where he gives a very glowing review of patch 1.5. And of course it's hyperbolic, an insane comeback. According to this guy, Victoria 3 was fine on launch anyway, so why did it even need to have a comeback, you know? With all due respect to him, why does a masterpiece need to have a comeback? Anyway, listen to this, it's very interesting how he compares Victoria 3 to Victoria 2.
In some ways it marries Europa Universalis 4 with Hearts of Iron 4, and arguably even with a dash of Imperator Rome, while at the same time very much being its own thing. You'll perhaps notice that I didn't really mention Victoria 2 here, which can seem strange. But Victoria 2 is a game from a completely different era. A game from vastly different design languages and philosophies, and for better or worse, a very different game from Victoria 3. Now I liked Victoria 2, but found it underwhelming in comparison to Paradox's immediate and much later games, and so this is no inherent negative factor for me. But despite these comparisons, Victoria 3 is very much its own game, and a year after release has come into its own.
I'm not playing that video to argue with it or pick it apart or anything, I just want to use it as an example of how Victoria 2 has to be dismissed in order to praise Victoria 3. or you have to not care that Victoria 3 is a complete departure from Victoria 2, and that's the fundamental controversy from which everything else about Victoria 3 flows. Victoria 2 was an exceptional, unique game, but when the sequel comes along we get Hearts of Iron 4, EU 4, with a dash of Imperator Rome. In his words, but may I add, all three of those games are better than Victoria 3. My point isn't as simplistic as, oh, I just wish they'd made another version of Victoria 2, remastered it or something. The point is that Victoria 2 is very flawed, very janky, has certain aspects that aren't very good, like the AI, but is so close yet so far from being the perfect Victorian-era geopolitical simulator. Those lads who made that game were so close to greatness while they designed it at the pub. When that Andy talks about the difference in eras between the old Paradox and the new Paradox, well, the old Paradox used to discuss making their games at the pub, the new one does it around a corporate board table. But a sequel to Victoria 2 could have fixed the problems with it, smoothed over the rough edges and come out with something truly great. Instead they chose to entirely gut it, write it off and start from scratch, putting in a team who either didn't like Victoria 2, didn't know anything about it, or both. And then the rest is history. You can see how that went for them, even on their own terms. One of the themes of this video is that, 1 year later, 1.5 has basically been a repeat of the launch of the game, in many respects. In the build-up, reception and aftermath. It was hyped as a big release, we had dev diaries leading up to it. The usual suspects react very positively to the info in the dev diaries, saying these are all really good ideas. There's a bit of a mini competition going on as to who can do the most bombastic, hyperbolic title and thumbnail. I'm going to refrain from using any soy reactions here, I've got nothing against these people. I'll only use a soy for someone I actually dislike. A day or two before the patch comes out you get sponsored videos, but when the players actually get their hands on it, the reviews drop to mixed, people start heavily criticising it on Reddit, Paradox Forum, Discord. The dev team starts getting inundated with bug reports, you get a known issues thread on the forum, and they're already talking about the hotfix. And there you go, you've basically got the same situation as launch, everything has gone wrong after it came out. History repeats itself. What I just described is the nightmare that never ends, the recurring nightmare. Are we just doomed to repeat this cycle over and over again, the next time being with Sphere of Influence in March 2024? Which, on account of its name, already has a lot of people prejudiced against it. There are many ways in which the 1.5 story was very different from launch though. In fact, there are ways in which it's even worse. One of the ways is from the business perspective, the finances. 1.5 obviously couldn't have made the tiniest fraction of the same amount of money as launch. Up until this point I've never questioned Victoria 3 as a financial success, or that it sold loads of copies. You can see that in this previous video. But with patch 1.5 and its surrounding things, particularly the free weekend, this is very different. And for the first time I'm entertaining thoughts that this really isn't going well from a business perspective and abandonment could be on the table. Contrary to what some people might assume, I've never argued that Victoria 3 would be abandoned anytime soon. There was a whole One Proud Bavarian video that railed against that idea. To summarise, his reason that Vic 3 wouldn't be abandoned is because it was financially successful, with loads of sales including loads of grand editions. It made way more money than Imperator Rome, and that the mixed reviews and low player count aren't necessarily signs of potential abandonment. Well okay, let's assume that's true. 1.5 is very different. At least on launch when they invested so much marketing money into the game, into those sponsorships and adverts, and obviously the cost of actually developing the game, they were doing so to make a profit out of sales.
Money can be exchanged for goods and services.
Woohoo! But this November, just over 1 year after the launch, they're investing money into a free patch, a free weekend, and a small $5 DLC. For a while I was anticipating that the next time they'd bring out the shills and do a major marketing push would be for the aforementioned Sphere of Influence expansion. This is the big one, this is the $30 expansion, the Royal Courts of Vic 3. That's really important for the game and they ought to invest a lot of marketing into making sure that's a success. But again, they invested into advertising a free weekend, investing money into not making money. The sponsorships weren't even for the $5 DLC about South America, they were for the free weekend. Now I know the idea behind that is to get players hooked, is to get them saying, oh this is a good game, I think I'll actually buy it. But for that to work, it actually has to be a good game. And it has to be so good that it gets rid of what doubts people had about it and convinces them that they've fixed it and it's now good. Maybe people who might be interested in buying the game but were put off at launch after seeing the war system or something. As I'm about to explain in further detail in the rest of this video, 1.5 was not that, and it was actually a lot worse than that. For the past several months the recent reviews on Victoria 3 had been climbing away from the overall mixed, and it got to mostly positive. They had been making good gradual progress and improvements with all the patches in between.
Now, there has been a lot of updates for this game, and one thing that did actually draw my attention to it is if you actually go to the Steam page now, it is mostly positive. So I assume the updates that have come out have actually improved the game.
But all those patches that have been improving the game and bringing the review score up were leading up to this moment.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for. Da, 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 da,
It brought the recent review score back down to mixed. You can't make this up. All the progress they had made is gone. Like I said, it is just like launch, it is repeating itself. We get to have that big vindication moment again. ISP said just now that he assumed that those previous patches had improved the game because he saw the reviews going to mostly positive. Therefore, to be logically consistent, we have to assume that patch 1.5 has made the game worse, or at best undone the progress made by those past updates. The most embarrassing part of all is that the recent reviews are worse than the overall reviews. All reviews are at 66%, recent is at 63%. What is going on? Just like launch, there's another massive disconnect between the content creators advertising the game and doing sponsorships for it, and what the players actually end up thinking when they play it. It's sad that Isora Productions is on the wrong side of that now after being on the right side at launch, but that's his choice. Let's read some of these reviews. It's nice to see some people actually mentioning Victoria 2. We've got one here saying it's crazy how Victoria 2 had the base elements of diplomacy and warfare at a very good and realistic level. And then Victoria 3 comes along and just decides to destroy all of it. Yeah, that's my point, thank you. Bought this a year after release and yet it feels a lot like a beta. So they did manage to get a sale out of that one. Wasn't just a free weekend player. And by the way, anyone who played this on the free weekend, it will say that they received the game for free. And of course there are plenty positive ones. This one is saying the game has improved nicely after 1.5. This one says, waited a year before giving my verdict. This is a big Victoria 2 player. Even though this one's a Victoria 2 player, this bit here is a fallacy. You see, it's excusing Victoria 3's bad bare-bones skeleton launch, as he says, because Victoria 2 was also the same, allegedly. Now, it's just such a bad argument. Because Victoria 3 has an infinitely larger budget, it took 12 years, they had the benefit of 12 years and an existing Victoria 2 to improve on, there was no excuse. The game is still not finished, it says, even while recommending it. It will need at least 1 or 2 more DLCs. So this one here is recommending it to everyone, but you also are recommended to buy DLCs as well as the full base game. But that's fine, I respect their opinions. Okay, let's just do most recent. This one criticises the game quite a bit, but still recommends it, which is a common theme. Still suffers from the same major flaws it had at release 1 year ago. And here's someone here saying all I ever wanted was Victoria 3 with better graphics and less bugs. I would generally agree with that, although I've also said they could have just improved on Vic 2. Could have made changes as long as they were good changes. Great strategy engine, great economics engine, great warfare. Ah, there it is. Interesting. Rough around the edges, pretty based game. This one's saying performance is getting worse. That's a very common theme. I've seen a lot of people saying 1.5 has actually worsened the performance of the game. Spain somehow becoming the occupier of a country in my war instead of me. That's a bug that I have seen reported numerous times on Reddit, Discord, everywhere. I mean, how can you come through an open beta and still have just game-breaking bugs in the war system? After this is allegedly the patch that finally fixes the war system and makes it finally fun to play. You still have huge bugs. Fundamentally broken while recommending it, but I can't help love this game. To be fair, that's how I think of Victoria 2 as well. Here we go, early access. Yep, latest update took the game from being one of my favourite Paradox games to being virtually unplayable. It added insane micromanagement for the military, a nonsensical local pricing system, and drastically slowed down almost every aspect of the game. On top of that, it performs even worse, running at maybe half the tick speed as it did pre 1.5. Jesus Christ. This game is too laggy, can't play anymore, gives specs, and this is a recommendation. Nice. Here we go. Wow. Scathing. Oh, it's now in a good starting place 1 year after launch. This is a very detailed one. Performance issues again. Recognizing that the game was improved since launch, fair. Seems to be a lot of effort into tapping this game's potential. Yeah, a lot of praise for them for continuing to work on it, which is a good thing. Doesn't work for this person. Horrible AI and diplomatic stuff. Too buggy to be considered a full game. Cannot believe I actually got sipped into this game only to be turned off by all the annoying bugs in warfare, economics and diplomacy, which are the main systems of the game. Warfare doesn't work. Front system is complete trash and broken. Terrible unfinished game. While I enjoy this game, it feels mostly another word for boring. I never played Vic 2, so I don't know what I missed out on. The warfare system is rather unimpressively boring. I like the depth of the construction system and the tech trees though. Not too small, not too big. Okay, alright. Another very mixed review even though it says recommended. I want to scroll down until we can start seeing the ones that received it for free, so I can see some of the free weekend reviews. Alright, product received for free, 0.6 hours, not recommended, takes hours just to load. I don't think that's a fair review to be honest, but it's one that Paradox brought upon themselves with the free weekend. This game really should be in early access or even better still, in development. There you go. But this one says, game's finally good and worth playing. Sehr gut. Product received for free, we got another free weekender here. Play Vicky 2. Swear word 3 is not worth it. 2.2 hours. Well, how did the free weekend turn out, Paradox? Was that a good idea? And by the way, while we're on the subject of Steam reviews, I just want to point out, every time I go down to the review page when I'm logged in, I get met with this review by one of my friends here, who says, recommended, and then worst warfare system ever made in a video game. That's the review I see every time I bloody open this. But then there's Based Marconi. I have to admit though, the free weekend is a very good thing from the point of view of the consumer, and that's whose side I'm on. It greatly helps people to make a good decision about whether they buy the product or not. Compare that to how they handled the launch of the game, which I covered in this video. Launch was terrible for the consumer, but after launch they've improved that a lot. But then on the other hand, it's been bad for Paradox, it's been bad for business. Or at least that's how it appears, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to that. I don't study Paradox's financial reports. You can come to your own opinion about what Paradox should do and how they balance being good for business and good for the consumer, and it's up to them as a company. But the bottom line is that 1.5 has been a bit of a disaster, no matter which way you look at it. It was just bad, but at least this time the consumer was better able to understand that before spending their money, or wasting their time. Also, after I talk about the player counts, I'll talk about the extensive open beta for 1.5. What effect did the free weekend have on the player count? Well, of course it brought it up quite a bit. But the problem with the free weekend in terms of the player count is that it obscures the number of players that patch 1.5 and its new updates and improvements simply brought back. People that got the game around launch abandoned it pretty quickly, saw the news about 1.5 and gave the game another chance. We can't see those people. What I can show you though is that with the free weekend and all that long over with, and 1.5 now in full effect and even having hotfixes that eliminate a lot of the issues with it, the player count has dropped back down to 10k, which is the level it was at in May of this year, 2023. But that's higher than the level it was at just prior to 1.5, which was about 4 to 6k. So through all of this, patch 1.5, the biggest patch for Victoria 3 so far, a big marketing campaign, a free weekend stunt, and a new small DLC. And also don't forget the game being on and off of sales throughout this whole time. The player count has basically just gotten back what it lost between May and December of 2023. They're clinging on instead of reaching new heights with their improvements. Did Victoria 3 being a free-to-play game finally bring it over those other games that have been mogging it for months on end? It managed to reach half of Hoi 4, but it did defeat Europa Universalis by 1,000 and soundly beat Stellaris. But now that it's no longer a free-to-play game, it has descended back down to below all three of those. Curiously, Stellaris had a free weekend back in May 2022, and during that free weekend Stellaris achieved just under double the player count Victoria 3 achieved in its free weekend. One thing I'll observe about the comparison of these two free weekends is the length of time between launch and that happening. With Stellaris they waited 6 years and with Victoria 3 they waited 1 year. That's clearly way too early. Like popping von Moltke's reforms prematurely and not getting the best use out of it in wars. By the time they did it with Stellaris, the game had been reworked to some very good degree, I think most people agree on that, but with Vic 3 1.5 that is not the case, as the actual players just explained to you in the reviews rather than what people on the payroll of Paradox told you. Stellaris also had a big catalogue of DLC by this point naturally, so it was better as a business decision, they could make more money off that. Are the Victoria 3 free weekenders going to buy Voice of the People? Doing the free weekend so soon for Vic 3 just absolutely has the whiff of desperation. I'm lingering on this comparison a lot, but I also did point out Stellaris quite extensively at the end of this video when talking about player counts, because the drop-off that Stellaris had on launch was very similar to what Victoria 3 had, so I was predicting that maybe they would go on similar paths if they started improving the game, and that if they played their cards right, Victoria 3 could have a Stellaris-level comeback. Victoria 3 was absolutely not comparable to Imperator Rome on launch, but it was very comparable to Stellaris. These are the player counts of the two games aligned to release, so as if they released on the same day, this is their player count journey together. They have about 70k concurrent players on launch, and then they have the massive drop-off. The drop-off itself is very similar. However, Stellaris begins to perform better than Victoria 3 very quickly. While Victoria 3 is desperately trying to figure out what to do, like U-turning on autonomous investment and figuring out how to improve their crappy war system, and not to mention releasing Voice of the People and Dawn of Wonder, Stellaris is putting out its patches and DLC. I don't know much about the development history of Stellaris, but this peak here is Stellaris' first major expansion, Utopia, which is very positive on Steam. And guess who made it? But Victoria 3's big peak here, roughly a year after launch, is from it becoming a free-to-play game for a weekend. The entire world was able to play Victoria 3 for free, and Stellaris' first expansion brings in way more players. Not to mention how Stellaris is actually bringing in money for Paradox here, making money so they could continue supporting the game. What's Victoria 3 doing? Making no money. It's a free patch and a free weekend. That's what I mean about the risk of abandonment. My conclusion from this comparison is still the same though. They absolutely need to knock it out the park with Sphere of Influence. The worse they perform in the lead up to it, 1.5 for example, the more pressure there is on that to do well. Sphere of Influence will mark the end of Grand Edition obligations. That's the last DLC that Victoria 3 is basically contractually obliged to make and release. After that, the nightmare could finally be over. But as for Stellaris now, in the modern day, they just dropped a DLC that got to mostly negative reviews. And they just published a Stellaris clone game set in the Star Trek universe, which was yet another badly received launch, got to mixed reviews, the usual story. The paraslop will never end. Now on to the next topic, and this one's a banger. Back on the 21st of November 2023, Victoria 3 made an official post here on Steam, asking the community to nominate it for the Labour of Love Award in the Steam Awards. Let me just define what this award says. This game has been out for a while. The team is well past the debut of their creative baby, but being the good parents they are, these devs continue to nurture and support their creation. This game, to this day, is still getting new content after all these years, plural. I don't even need to begin to describe how insulting and condescending this is. After releasing such a bad game on launch with the typical Paradox model of the bare bones launch, which they will attempt to improve later with updates and DLC, 1 year later already asking people to nominate it for this award, and even if it had been many years, no Paradox game actually meets the spirit of this award. It's a labour of love. Paradox games get continued so that they can make more money off of DLC. There's a clear business model behind what they do. But if any Paradox game deserves it, it's probably EU4, just because of the sheer amount of time that they have supported that one and made new content for it. As you can see, people have reacted to it by responding with 92 clown awards, and these things on Steam are actually called awards. These are the only awards that Victoria 3 deserves. I did my part there, of course. Maybe a better way to respond to this would have been to nominate Imperator Rome for Labour of Love. You know, they did some mandatory security patch for it not long ago, but it's too late now. As you can see from the comments, people didn't take too well to this, and these are people that are presumably following Victoria 3 on Steam, so it's Victoria 3's own community. Delusional devs. Someone there is mentioning in-game chat for multiplayer. There's something I haven't thought about for a while. Yeah, they still don't have that. You need to earn these things, Paradox. And there's loads of pages. This goes on and on and on. You know, have you lost your mind? Unreal? I mean, this just goes on and on. I mentioned this earlier, so now let's have a look at it. Along with patch 1.5, the free weekend and so on, they released a small roundabout $5 DLC called Colossus of the South. It's a content pack with flavour, which Victoria 3 is sorely lacking. It's about South America, and I know that South America is often overlooked and underrated in historical games. I don't want to bring South America down or anything, but when Vic 3 is in such a desperate fledgling position in the player counts as I just showed you, I would have expected them to go for their core audience, which is in Europe and North America. Not that you have to be from South America to play and enjoy this. But in any case, clearly according to the reviews, Victoria 3 has finally done something right. This DLC, though small and rather inconsequential to the game overall, has turned around the bad track record of DLC, Voice of the People, Dawn of Wonder. Apparently they've really learned from the mistakes of Voice of the People and released a decent level of content for the amount of money here. They even threw Colossus of the South into the Grand Edition, even though it wasn't part of what was initially promised in the Grand Edition, so that's also a really good gesture. Like I said, they're being a lot nicer to the consumer after the launch of the game. So finally, they've done something right, but you've got to put this in the wider context of 1.5 and the rest of this entire video. The various sponsorships were not for this DLC, they were for the free weekend. The 1.5 update and the free weekend were clearly the bigger priority, and this being a small and cheap DLC couldn't have funded all of that marketing campaign and development. I said how 1.5 was a repeat of the launch of the game in some respects, but one of the main ways it was different, and made a poor release much less excusable, was that they actually had an open beta for this patch lasting just under 3 months. This open beta was set to commence on the 28th of August, and I made plans to stream it on that day, set aside some time, and then they delayed it. Where did they tell the community that they were delaying the open beta? At the very bottom of the dev diary about Dawn of Wonder, the art pack DLC which made the sun rise in the west. To be more specific, I actually learned about the delay from looking at a One Proud Bavarian thumbnail from his video about this dev diary. That was helpful because he might have been the only person who read it. The open beta was certainly a good idea on principle to allow people to give feedback, but in my opinion it became a completely pointless endeavour. First of all by referring to what I've already shown you, which is how patch 1.5 came out officially and bombed in reviews, bringing the game back down to mixed and so on, because it was still inundated with bugs and issues. So an open beta is a failure on its own terms here because it did not lead to a better release of the patch they did an open beta for. Unless, without an open beta, it would have been even worse somehow. As for the format of the open beta itself, it was set to have 3 different versions, 3 different patches within the open beta. The first iteration, which was the one that I happened to play, was so bad and pre-alpha that it was completely pointless. I'm actually surprised that the dev team had no shame and released this to the public to be playable even as an open beta. I know they warned us, but what was the point of it at all? Not only was the new stuff they were adding broken, they had to turn off many features and break other things to even get it out. What was the point of that? What feedback can you give? And what was so bad that even that version was delayed? The feedback they were looking for was on the general ideas and what they were proposing, like the changes to the war system, which were written down in dev diaries. Perhaps the funniest comparison that we can make about the state of the first patch of the 1.5 open beta was that it was worse than the Victoria 3 leak of April 2022, which was from a closed beta. They rejected all feedback on that and that demoralised the team, but then they released this crap. However, the first iteration of the open beta doesn't really matter at all, it's not relevant to what happened after. I'm just talking about it more because it's the one that I happened to play. And for the record, I did give my critiques on the ideas of the new changes to the war system within that stream. I didn't just shit on the extremely early broken version. But my basic overall point about the open beta was that it's a good idea, and many people provided good feedback through the proper channels, which I'm mostly banned from, but it clearly failed because patch 1.5 came out shite anyway, with loads of bugs and problems, which you've seen in a sample of Steam reviews, and it was also all over Reddit, Paradox forums and Discord, the usual places. They've had to put out 3 consecutive hotfixes on 1.5 after it dropped officially. That is absolutely shocking. Well, maybe not for Victoria 3. This was the plan for the third and final iteration of the open beta, fully feature complete for the 1.5 release, just bug fixing.
So that was a lie.
Clearly they ran into a lot more unforeseen problems, and this iteration of the open beta had its own hotfix. It's one thing to delay the release of the whole game, which they should have done to be honest, but what's stopping them from delaying a patch? They delayed the actual open beta by a few days. I don't get them, their decisions are just all over the place and bizarre. Anyway, now I'm going to give my opinion on the war system changes that came with 1.5. Well yes, I did just make you sit through 29 minutes before getting to the actual nitty gritty you want to hear about. This isn't going to be absolutely comprehensive, I'm going to hit the big topics and talk about things overall and compare to Victoria 2 of course. So they actually added more than one battle per frontline, good on them. That's the very basic thing that it took them a year to do that makes Victoria 3's war system better within its own self-inflicted confines. Likewise with all the front splitting stuff, they've consolidated fronts between allies into one big front and redone the way your army will advance into enemy states to prevent loads of little fronts forming, or in other words making encirclements not happen. They've taken encirclements out of the game, guys. And there are also lots of non-war system changes that I'm not going to talk about. I can't even get my head around local prices, let alone give an opinion about them. They didn't just make every market have its own prices, every bloody region does. They proposed the changes to the war system in dev diaries before the open beta, gradually implemented them over the next few months in the beta, then officially released them in 1.5 on the 14th of November 2023, then hotfixed them about 3 or 4 times as well. One of the major changes is the introduction of formations, which finally allow you to group your armies into something tangible, which you can toggle the composition of, allocating individual units of infantry, cavalry and artillery between them. In the dev diary where they first unveiled this change, they went into a lot of detail for the reasons they were doing it. This is an interesting contrast from the dev diaries first unveiling their new war system, where they barely gave any reasons or justifications for it at all. This forced the community to fill in the blanks and come up with the 19th century was the most peaceful era in human history and other great reasons. In the first paragraph there you get the classic reason, which is Victoria 3 is not a war game. Which is why 1 year later they're doing a massive update about war, focusing on it, getting Ludi et Historia to do a war tutorial on their new YouTube channel, making a DLC which includes the brutal Paraguayan War of the Triple Alliance in South America. War, war, war.
That's it, Chris. It's war. War has broken out. This is a war.
That's it. Yes, it's war.
One thing they said in their introduction to the new war system changes, and I couldn't agree with it more, is that they were dissatisfied with the lack of tangible location for your armed forces. I'll never know why they intentionally made it like that on launch, but I'm glad they finally agree with me. I got so much hate for saying what the Vic 3 devs are now saying. Of course, this isn't the complete introduction of army micromanagement to the game, far from it, and I've got a lot of critiques on what they have added. They're just moving in a general direction and saying some things I agree with. My opinion on formations is that this is reinventing the wheel. They are effectively adding stacks back to the game, but they had to call it something different. They wanted to try something new, they wanted to experiment with a radical new vision. So anyway, we're back to stacks now. The monkeys on the typewriters have finally accidentally reproduced some great works. Of course they've done it in the worst way possible with a lot of spelling errors. So this is what a formation looks like on the map. It's a little box with some stats in it. It's a tangible thing, it's got a little icon. And when you move them, I say move, you just assign them to a front line and they automatically move around. They turn into one singular horse cart which can walk over water and rivers and stuff, and then it arrives at your front line, where it joins this sort of fortified encampment at your side of the border, and the border is still that fiery red front line from all the way back. When the war actually breaks out, this erupts into fighting and shooting. It's an absolute clusterfuck, but then again I suppose war is. As you advance in the frontline moves, these things do teleport from the previous frontline to the new one, which is just weird. That's really just how it looks, and that's neither here nor there. I think it looks fine in its own right. It's taken over a year, but Victoria 3 is starting to have some actual style and an identity in its war system, just in terms of visuals. However, this new visual style it has, it really is just overcompensating for the lack of actual substance behind this system and your lack of control over it. Like a Marvel film putting in loads of big flashy special effects and battles. In Vic 2, it's just a giant man walking around with a number underneath him, and then when he goes into battle he just starts shooting the enemy repeatedly. But Victoria 2's war system actually has substance behind it. It doesn't need to have a flashy, amazing 3D art style. Victoria 3 now has that and looks good, but at its core, fundamentally, it's still the same god-awful system where you can only set your units to attack or defend with no control over them. The new 3D graphics and stuff, unfortunately, is just polishing a turd. I've put in a lot of stock images and representations of imagery throughout this video, but I won't do it for that one. These stacks that they've re-added to the game have therefore necessarily re-added a type of micromanagement to Victoria 3, even though they built their game to not have micromanagement in war, and they built a following and a community who really liked that. They won't be able to balance these two interest groups, but it's funny to watch them try. The micro they've added to Warfare is the arrangement of your stacks, the composition of units you put in them and which generals you choose to lead them. That composition as you build a formation and put infantry, cavalry, artillery into it is completely based on the system of barracks buildings. This makes it more complicated in a way than Victoria 2, where you can just turn soldier pops directly into armies. The complaint about Vic 2 there is that it's tedious to arrange these into stacks and change them around and all that. It's not difficult or complicated. What Victoria 3 does is bring the building system through barracks into the war system, and you have to go through that and manage that. You have to micromanage these barracks buildings, change the production methods and all that sort of thing. And this is all done through Victoria 3's menu and buildings UI. It ties the building system, which is the fundamental core of Victoria 3, into the war system. I don't like the way in which Victoria 3 boils everything down to buildings, instead of having different unique systems for various aspects of your country like Victoria 2 did. Research, it's a university building. Administration, it's a government admin building with filing cabinets. Soldiers, it's a barracks building. Navies is a building. All your RGOs are a building. And all of that is constructed through your Hoi 4 building queue with your Hoi 4 civ factories. If you suddenly have to make a new army to build up for an upcoming war, you have to go into the construction queue and prioritise these new barracks above your lumber yards, paper mills, government admin buildings or whatever you are constructing. And frankly, I've come to hate that more than the actual war system. When I think about actually playing Victoria 3, it's the building queue and all that shite that turns me off. So the Vic 3 devs might be in for a bit of a shock if they actually add full micromanagement back to the game and find out that I'm still not playing it. Yeah, hopefully that little building tangent will give you an idea of how I can never really like this game even if they are patching over a few of the cracks in the war system. It's fundamentally just crap. That's the cookie clicker element of it. So they added the micromanagement of arranging your stacks in Victoria 3. Sorry, I mean formations. Arranging your stacks was one of the most widely complained about aspects of Victoria 2's war management, and is used as an argument for the whole direction Vic 3 went in. But at least in Victoria 2 you have the payoff of using those stacks, moving them around yourself with various strategies and defeating the enemy. Strategies such as taking your army off the border and defending terrain within your country like a river or mountains. Maybe even building some fortifications in those positions. Where's that in Vic 3? Or the negative payoff of actually being defeated and seeing those stacks that you put time into arranging and have an investment in being destroyed. But the point is, it's in your own hands, and it depends on how you choose to use your armies, instead of how the AI chooses to use them. A lot of the negative reviews about patch 1.5 specifically complain about how it adds more micromanagement to the game. Now obviously I want them to, but they've gone about it in the worst possible way, getting the worst of both worlds. They brought in the most tedious aspect of micro, without bringing in the good bit that we all want, which is to be able to move those armies around ourselves. Now patch 1.5 could be a halfway house between maybe 2.0, where they do add that, if the game lasts that long. But that's not what they're presenting it as. They're telling us this patch is amazing on its own terms, in its own right, making official tutorials for how the war system works in it, trying to claw back as many players as they can. This is the mega jumbo anniversary patch that's turning around the game. And from what I've read, the Vic 3 devs still say that they're committed to that underlying vision, even though they've backtracked on about half of it. Actually adding unit micromanagement to the game might not even be possible, or it might entail reworking more of the game. For example, look at the province map. This is simply not built to support Victoria 2 or EU4 style stack management. You've got a huge amount of roughly evenly sized provinces, which are not weighted for population or importance or anything. It's much more like Hearts of Iron 4, so if they were going to completely rework the system, it would be along those lines. But even Hoi 4 weighs its unnamed provinces around population, roughly. Fighting a micromanagement war would be exactly the same in the Sahara Desert and the wastes of Siberia as it would be in Western Europe. And by the way, yes, this is Siberia, just let me zoom out. The province map is bizarre overall. There's an infamous giant province there in Siberia. Could they not have added another 50 provinces there? Come on, finish it. I actually like how provinces, as useless as they are in the game, are visible in the military lens. But it just makes me wish I could take these formations and move them around these provinces. And yes, that Siberian mega province, a giant gulag or something, is visible in the actual game in the province view. Victoria 3 is undergirded by one of the biggest province maps ever with the most amount of provinces, and the game does next to nothing with them. The pops are simplified to the state level as I've been over before, and the military system, ironically, is one of the very few systems that actually makes use of these provinces, outside of your control and micromanagement. So I don't know, I'm just going to leave it there. I've given you a good overview of formations and the war system overall. Half of what I talked about was the war system in general, not necessarily the specific changes of 1.5, and I completely missed out navies. But the change they've gone through is very similar to formations, where they are now a tangible fleet, which you can send to do the same few missions that they always could do. If I am to go into any more detail, I'll actually have to play the game, maybe stream it or something, and I don't think I will. I'd rather play Lethal Company. The system that I just critiqued is the Victoria 3 war system in 1.5 in theory, how it should work and how it does work when it's functioning properly. The problem is, on the actual implementation, they still manage to break it, and come out with a semi-functioning patch which also massively decreases the performance of the game and somehow unoptimizes Vic 3. This is what I found extensively after reading reviews, Reddit posts, the Vic 3 Discord, and the Paradox forum. I go to the places where you'd expect them to be very pro Victoria 3 and supportive, and find that they're heavily slating the game. Of course there's a lot of positivity, but I'm very surprised by how much negativity I've seen. One proud Bavarian who's lived in my mind rent-free for about 2 years now made a brutally honest video heavily criticising the implementation of patch 1.5 and the fact that it had to have up to 4 hotfixes after it came out officially. Of course, he does support most of the overall ideas and the direction of these changes. Unlike an actual basic shill, he will heavily criticise the implementation of things in this game, but never the overall vision. Whereas the logical step that I make is to put 2 and 2 together and point out that repeatedly bad implementations are the result of a poor, flawed vision, which is fundamentally bad at its core. Otherwise, what's the reason you get a bad launch, bad DLC, and bad patches? You basically just have to argue that the dev team sucks, and it's a skill issue that they can't implement this overall great vision. I say that's not necessarily true, they just keep banging their head up against a bad vision that was handed down to them from above by, the people who designed the game and came up with the ideas, Risington and that other bloke with the beard. I also heavily criticise the marketing and business decisions behind the game. But yeah, OPP's video about 1.5 is very good, and he raises a lot more interesting points and talks about his mod, and how it's basically exceeding the development of Victoria 3 and making improvements and changes that the dev team can't make. When modders have to spend their time catching up with every broken patch and hotfix, and rebalancing the game so it actually works to an extent, it holds them back from going off and doing new and great things and developing creative, amazing mods. This is the case to an extent with every game that's being actively developed and patched, but with Victoria 3 it's bound to be worse, because half of these patches come out completely broken, require hotfixes, and they're changing major game mechanics every time. Vic 3 has some great ambitious mods in the pipeline, but there's no doubt that they're being held back, and will also suffer from the lack of interest there is in Vic 3 in general and the player count. One very interesting comparison we can do is see what big major Victoria 3 mods there are when it reaches the same length of time after release as Crusader Kings 3, when it had Elder Kings and the Game of Thrones mod. 2 absolutely phenomenal mods. What will Victoria 3 modding have to show for itself, when currently on the Steam Workshop you have to scroll about 20 mods down before you get anything other than bug fixes, UI changes and rebalances? Victoria 3 modders even got about 9 months of early access to the game in the early modding program, but I better stop myself before I go off on a lot more tangents based on that. Let those Vic 3 modders cook though. If the game will ever be good or fun, it'll be through them rather than the dev team, I think. Anyway, that'll about do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed everyone and found something interesting in there and got a good update on the absolute state of Victoria 3. This video ended up way longer and way more detailed than I originally intended. I thought, okay, I'll just do a quick 10-minute rundown on patch 1.5, but then it keeps creeping into a longer video. I go into way more detail, I cover more topics, then you end up with my longest Victoria 3 discussion video yet. I suppose the next time I'll actually talk about this game at all will be with that Sphere of Influence DLC, because it's really important, it's make or break. Maybe I'll see if there's any unfortunate soul who got the Grand Edition who can host a multiplayer game, then I can check it out for free. I really hope the Vic 3 team and Paradox don't do anything stupid between now and March 2024. I just don't want to think about Victoria 3 at all for these next few months. But knowing them, they'll come out with something, they'll release some statement, they'll do some nostalgia bait for Victoria 2 that pisses me off. But anyway, please give the video a like and continue the conversation down in the comments, let me know what you think. Did I miss anything? Was I fair? Was I unfair? If you're one of those big Victoria 3 lovers and you absolutely hate me, try something other than an ad hominem for once. Give me your best shot. If you want to watch me streaming Victoria 2 and other great games, follow me on Twitch and check that out. Join my Discord where you can also continue the conversation if you have anything interesting to say. Unlike the official Paradox Discord, if you disagree with me and the general view of the community there, you're still very much welcome as long as you obey the rules. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, have a nice day and goodbye.